Tomoe Gozen now joins the ranks of the samurai legends, the greatest female warrior in medieval Japan.
She was said to be as beautiful as she was deadly. Her long black hair flowed beneath a steel helmet and her eyes remained calm even as the world around her burned. Tomoe Gozen was the most feared female samurai of the Han period. She rode into battle swinging a blade sharper than the rules that tried to contain her. But here's the catch. No one knows how much of her story is true. Was she a flesh and blood warrior who carved her name into history? Or was she a legend woven into Japan's oldest war songs? To discover the truth, we need to dig through centuries of Japanese myth and memory to find the woman behind the armor. Japan's warrior age, birth of the samurai. To understand Tomoe Gozen's world, you first have to picture what Japan was like 1,000 years ago. This was the Heian period, a time of beauty, poetry, and ruthless ambition. It was an era when loyalty was everything and when honor mattered more than life itself. Out of this world emerged a new kind of fighter, the samurai. The word samurai translates to one who serves. These were not wandering swordsmen or movie heroes. They were the personal armies of powerful feudal lords called daimyo. Their duty was to protect their master's land and reputation, even if it meant dying for them. Over time, these warriors developed a strict moral code known as Bushido or the Way of the Warrior. This code was built on courage, loyalty, and self-discipline. To break it was to invite shame, which was considered worse than death. Some samurai even performed seppuku, or ritual suicide, to preserve their honor when defeated. Most samurai were men. Women were expected to marry young, manage the household, and raise heirs while their husbands went off to war. A few learned to defend their homes, but that was as far as their sword training went. However, in secret, some women, especially daughters and wives of infamous samurai, were trained to fight. They were called anabujisa, meaning woman warrior. They wielded the naginata, a long-bladed polearm that gave them reach and power, and the kaiken, a dagger small enough to hide in their robes. These women weren't trained for open battle. They were the last line of defense, protectors of the hearth and their family. However, out of this quiet shadow of Japan's women warrior culture, one woman who refused to stay hidden behind the walls of her home would rise. She would lead men into battle, command troops, and fight for more than survival. She fought for glory. Her name was Tomoe Gozen, and she would become the most feared female samurai of the Han period. How did this mysterious woman defy every rule her society tried to force upon her? The making of a legend. Who was Tomoe Gozen? Ask 10 historians who Tomoe Gozen was, and you'll get 10 different answers. Some say she was born into a samurai family. Others claim she was a servant who rose through the ranks by sheer talent. What everyone agrees on is this. Tomoe Gozen lived during the late 12th century near the end of the Heian period when Japan was torn apart by a civil war between two mighty clans, the Taira and the Minamoto. It was a time when loyalty could make you famous and betrayal could end your bloodline. In the 12th century Japan, you were known not for where you came from, but for how fearlessly you fought. Tomoe's name itself tells us something important about her. Tomoe referred to the swirling comb-shaped pattern painted on her armor. And Gozen was an honorific used for noble or respected women. It wasn't her real name. Women of her rank were rarely called by their given names, and her title carried weight and reverence. She served under a powerful Minamoto general named Kizo Yoshinaka. He was a man of ambition, charisma, and according to legend, he had a deep connection to Tomoe. Some say she was his concubine. Others say she was his wife. Whatever the truth, Yoshinaka trusted her more than most of his men. She rode beside him into battle, commanded troops, and was known for her mastery of the bow and the long curved blade. Chronicles describe her as beautiful, fair-skinned, and fearless, able to handle the fiercest horse and roughest terrain without flinching. But what made her extraordinary wasn't just her beauty or skill. It was that she fought on the offensive. Most women warriors defended castles or homes. But Tomoe charged into battlefields filled with men twice her size and always left with victory. That alone made her a legend in a world where women were supposed to stay hidden. Her story is pieced together mainly from an epic text called The Tale of the Heik. This mix of history and poetry immortalized the Genie War, and Tomoe appears like a ghost briefly and powerfully. Still, those few lines were enough to make her one of the most feared figures of her age. And soon her loyalty to Yoshaka would thrust her into one of Japan's bloodiest and most fateful wars. Training a warrior, breaking every rule. It's hard to imagine how a woman like Tomoe Gozen became such a deadly warrior in an age when most women weren't even allowed to handle a sword. Yet, every legend starts somewhere, and hers likely began in a home where tradition met rebellion. Some historians believe she was trained alongside the sons of a samurai household where she learned archery, horseback riding, and swordsmanship from the same masters who taught the men. Others suggest that she was born into a family that simply didn't see limits where others did. What's certain is that Tomoe didn't just learn to fight, she mastered it. While most women of the Han period were taught self-defense to protect their homes, Tomoe trained for war. She could ride a horse at full speed and release arrows so accurately that men whispered her name as both a warning and a prayer. Her favorite weapon wasn't the traditional naginata or the long pole arm that symbolized a woman's defense. She used the katana, the sword of men. In her hands, it wasn't just a weapon. It was an equalizer. For male samurai, training was hard but structured. For Tomoe, it meant pushing through the skepticism, whispers, and disbelief of her male-dominated era. Every bruise and cut was proof that she belonged on the battlefield. She wasn't just defending herself. She was rewriting the rules of what a warrior could be. By the time she joined Yoshinaka's ranks, she had become far more than a novelty. She was a commander. Reports from the Tale of the Heik describe her leading 1,000 men into combat with her white banners flashing like lightning against a sea of steel. She charged first, fought hardest, and returned last. It's said that no soldier under her command ever doubted her courage. Still, for all her victories, Tomoe's story carried a quiet tension. Japan was not ready for a woman warrior like her. Brilliant, loyal, and impossible to ignore. And as Yoshinaka's ambitions grew, so too did the dangers surrounding her. Ahead lay the Genie War, a conflict that would tear the nation apart, a conflict that would turn Tomoe Gozen from a warrior into a legend. The Genie War, when legends are forged. The Genie War was Japan's great civil war, a 5-year storm of blood and ambition that pitted the Taira and Minamoto clans against each other for control of the empire. It began in 1180. This was a time when loyalty could shift overnight and alliances were written in ink that never truly dried. For Tomoe Gozen, this war would be the stage that carved her name into eternity. She fought under Minamoto no Yoshinaka, a general both brilliant and unpredictable. Yoshinaka had a vision to take Kyoto, overthrow the Taira, and secure power for himself. However, the Minamoto family itself was divided, and behind every sword was a cousin waiting for a chance to rise. Amid this chaos, Tomoe's skills stood out like fire in the dark. In one campaign, she led a cavalry unit across the mountain passes of Shinano province, ambushing enemy lines with precision that stunned even seasoned warriors. Her tactics weren't just brave, they were clever. She used terrain to her advantage. She struck fast and retreated faster. Above all, she kept her opponents guessing. Soldiers said that when she rode into view, her white armor gleamed like snow. Her enemies hesitated, just long enough for her arrows to find their target. The most famous of these clashes was the Battle of Yokoto Togawara. The air was thick with fog and tension as the Taira forces advanced. They were confident in their superior numbers. Tomoe positioned her archers high along the ridges and waited for the signal. When the enemy drew close, her troops rained arrows down like hailstones, breaking their formation before leading a brutal countercharge on horseback. Witnesses said that she fought as though possessed by the spirit of 1,000 men. By the end of that day, the Taira army was broken and Tomoe's name was whispered in awe. But success breeds danger. Yoshinaka's victories made him powerful, and power bred jealousy, especially from his own family. His cousin, Minamoto no Yoritomo, viewed him as a threat. The stage was set for betrayal, and Tomoe could sense the shadow creeping closer. Still, her loyalty never wavered. She rode beside Yoshinaka even as allies turned to enemies and the Minamoto banner became a target. The final confrontation would come soon at Azu, a snow-covered plain where Tomoe would fight her most unforgettable battle. There she would prove why she was called the most feared female samurai of the Han period and why legends never truly die. The Battle of Azu, a warrior's last stand. By the winter of 1184, the tide had turned. Minamoto no Yoshinaka, once a rising star, now found himself hunted by his own kin. His army was shattered, his banners were tattered, and his enemies were closing in from every side. The snow outside Kyoto fell heavily that morning, muffling the sound of horses and the dread that filled the air. Only 5 warriors remained by his side. Among them rode Tomoe Gozen. To most, this would have been the moment to flee. But for Tomoe, retreat was unthinkable. She adjusted her armor, brushed the snow from her bow, and looked to Yoshinaka for direction. He met her gaze, and according to the old chronicles, told her to leave. As a woman, he said, it would shame me to die with you beside me. It's hard to know what Tomoe felt in that moment. It might have been anger, grief, or maybe even heartbreak. But what we do know is this. Tomoe did not leave quietly. The tale of the Heat describes what happened next in tones that tremble with awe. Tomoe turned her horse toward the oncoming soldiers. Her white banner waved through the snowstorm. Ahead of her, a famous general named Uchiha Yayoshi charged. He was eager to claim the honor of defeating the woman warrior that everyone whispered about. Tomoe met him head-on. The clash was brutal and short. She seized him by the neck, dragged him from his horse, and took his head cleanly with one swing of her sword. Holding it aloft, she spurred her horse forward and vanished into the haze of battle. Another version says that she faced Hatakayama Shigata instead. A man so humiliated at the thought of losing to a woman that he fled rather than fight her. Whichever account is true, one thing is certain. No man who met Tomoe Gozen on that field ever forgot her. When she finally turned back, Yoshinaka was surrounded. With his horse mired in the snow and his armor shattered, he performed seppuku, choosing honor over capture. By the time Tomoe returned, it was over. The man she had followed into every battle was gone, and the army they had built together lay scattered across the white plain. Some say she wept for him before vanishing into the mountains. Others claim that she fought her way through the enemy lines until her sword broke in her hands. History falls silent here, but her legend only grows louder, and that's where the mystery begins. Because from that day forward, Tomoe Gozen simply disappeared. There was no body, no burial, and no farewell, just snow. And the faint echo of who's fading into legend. The vanishing of Tomoe Gozen. After the Battle of Azu, Tomoe Gozen seemed to vanish as suddenly as she had appeared. The snow melted, the war ended, and Japan moved on. But her story didn't. It lingered like a half-remembered dream whispered by monks, sung by storytellers, and argued over by historians for centuries. What really happened to the most feared female samurai of the Han period? That depends on which version you believe. In one tale, Tomoe escaped the battlefield at 28 and sought refuge in a remote temple. There, she shaved her head, took on a new name, and lived the rest of her life as a Buddhist nun. They say she died at 90 with her sword buried beside her. It's a version that feels poetic, almost merciful, as if Japan itself wanted to grant her the peace it denied her in life. However, another story paints a darker ending. According to one account, she was captured by the warrior Wada Yoshimura and forced to become his concubine. Trapped in a life that stripped her of the very freedom she fought for, Tomoe endured in silence as a prisoner of both politics and memory. And then there's the wildest tale of all. It claims that after Yoshinaka's death, Tomoe went on a one-woman mission of vengeance. She hunted down every man responsible, killing them one by one. When her final act was complete, she carried Yoshinaka's severed head into the sea and walked into the waves, never to return. Some say that the ocean swallowed her whole. Others believe she became a spirit, forever guarding her lord's honor. No one knows which of these stories is true, but maybe that's part of her power. Legends survive because they refuse to stay pinned down. Whether she lived or died, Tomoe Gozen had already done the impossible. She had become unforgettable. Centuries later, her name would resurface again, not in battlefields or scrolls, but in art and literature. The woman who vanished into the snow would be continuously reborn, and her story shifted with each retelling. The woman behind the myth. So, who was Tomoe Gozen really? Was she a flesh and blood warrior who carved her name into history, or was she a poetic invention meant to inspire courage? That's the question that's haunted historians for centuries. Most of what we know about her comes from the tale of the Heian, an epic written more than 50 years after her time. It's part history, part folklore, and part moral lesson, blending truth and imagination so tightly that separating them feels impossible. In that sense, Tomoe sits right on the edge of history and legend. There are no reliable records of her birth, no official grave, and no confirmed descendants. Yet her presence in the Heian feels too vivid and specific to be pure fiction. The way the chroniclers describe her with her long black hair, her mastery of the bow and her calm face in battle suggests that she may have been based on a real warrior. Someone whose courage left a deep impression on the men who survived her. Archaeological evidence gives us another clue. In recent decades, excavations of ancient battle sites from the Heian period have uncovered remains of women buried with weapons like bows, swords, and armor. This suggests that female warriors were far more common than once believed. These weren't noble ladies in silk. They were soldiers. They fought, they bled, and in death, they were honored like men. Tomoe might not have been the only one, but she was the one history refused to forget. Myths have a strange way of filling the gaps that history leaves behind. Over time, Tomoe became more than a warrior. She became an idea, a symbol of loyalty, bravery, and the defiance of limits. Some see her as Japan's answer to Joan of Arc. Others view her as the embodiment of Bushido, the way of the warrior before the word even existed. Whether she was a real woman or a story built from fragments, Tomoe Gozen represents something far larger than any record could capture. The moment a single person breaks the rules so completely that the world has no choice but to remember. And remember her they did. Even as centuries passed, Japan would find new ways to tell her story. And each one revealed as much about the people retelling it as about the woman herself. Legacy across centuries. Centuries after her disappearance, Tomoe Gozen refused to fade into history. Instead, she evolved, reshaped by each new era that retold her story. In the 14th century, her legend found new life on stage through no plays. In these, masked performers moved with slow, deliberate grace to mourn her loyalty and her loss. By the 18th century, kabuki theater gave her fire and movement again. This turned her into a tragic heroine, part warrior, part ghost, and part love story. Artists of the Edo period carved her image into woodblock prints. Tomoe in gleaming armor, her hair loose in the wind, her sword poised mid-swing. She looks both terrifying and graceful, a contradiction that made her unforgettable. These prints hang in homes and tea houses admired not just for their beauty but for what she represented. A woman who had dared to do what men believed only they could. Even today, Tomoe Gozen's image lives everywhere. It's in anime and manga, modern novels, and video games. In each version, she shifts slightly. Sometimes she's fierce and cold. Other times, she's noble and kind, but her core remains unchanged. She is still the most feared female samurai of the Han period. The woman who defied her place in society and rewrote the meaning of warrior. In Kyoto, she is honored every year at the Jedi Matsuri, the festival of the ages. A woman dressed as Tomoe rides proudly through the streets on horseback. Her armor glints in the sunlight, and she is watched by thousands who might not know her full story, but feel her spirit just the same. At the Tokuanji Temple, a statue of Tomoe stands beside that of her lord Yoshinaka. The two are forever frozen in bronze, side by side, bound by loyalty, legend, and love. Time has a way of sanding down the rough edges of history. But Tomoe's edges remain sharp. She isn't remembered because she was perfect. She's remembered because she was impossible to ignore. And even now, more than 800 years later, Japan still bows quietly to the memory of the woman who refused to bow to anyone. Up ahead, we'll step out of legend for a moment to uncover what made her truly feared, and what her story reveals about the heart of courage itself, the real meaning of fearlessness. When people call Tomoe Gozen the most feared female samurai of the Han period, they often imagine her sword flashing or her enemies falling before her horse. But her true fearlessness ran deeper than combat. It lived in the quiet choices she made when the world tried to shrink her. In a time when women were told to serve, she chose to lead. When told to retreat, she charged. When told her loyalty should define her, she decided what loyalty meant for herself. Fearlessness for Tomoe wasn't the absence of fear. It was the refusal to let fear make her small. On the battlefield, she faced warriors who doubted her and killed them with such skill that it left them speechless. Off the battlefield, she faced an even harder fight. The weight of expectation. The courage it takes to wield a sword is one thing. The courage to exist beyond permission. That's another kind of war entirely. Her story forces us to rethink what bravery really looks like. Maybe it isn't always loud or bloody. Maybe it's the steady calm in the middle of chaos and the decision to keep riding when the world says stop. Tomoe Gozen's legend endures not only because she conquered men, but because she conquered the boundaries around her. And that's why centuries later, she's not just remembered, she's revered. The mists of time. When the snow finally stopped falling at Azu, history fell silent, too. The records of Tomoe Gozen end there with no witnesses and no grave. Just a name carried by the wind. And maybe that's how it was meant to be. Some legends aren't supposed to end. They're meant to echo. Tomoe Gozen lived in a world built to forget women like her. Yet here we are, nearly 10 centuries later, still admiring her name. We picture her armor catching the morning light, her eyes calm, and her sword steady. We remember the woman who rode into battle when the world told her to back down. Whether she was real or half imagined no longer matters. What matters is what she represents. The courage to live on your own terms, even when the cost is everything. Tomoe Gozen stands at the crossroads of myth and memory as a reminder that some stories survive not because they are written in books, but because they are written in the spirit of those who refuse to yield. If you could ask Tomoe Gozen one question about her life or her choices on the battlefield, what would it be? Share your thoughts with us in the comments, we'd love to hear. Thank you for watching and see you in the next.